an educator, a fine art artist, a follower of contemporary pop physics, dilettante, mind explorer, consciousness framer. Tell I'm not a housekeeper. Let's see. Well, that would suffice. Who I am, if I could define that, other than a quantum consciousness information flow in a totally integrated space with a non-separateness. Then I'm getting close. In other words, I haven't got a clue on the second part of who I am, other than a name. So I guess a name will have to do, won't it? So, what else would you like to find out now that we've really ran through this?
Let's go into some of your different types of work, some of the different things you do, painting, casting.
Okay. Oh, let's see, where do you begin on that kind of stuff, too? Well, I guess I'm a multimediaist at first. I would say that multimedia is something that I work in. I think that the nature of technique and process, when learned, becomes a tool. If one can paint, that's a tool. If one can cast bronze, that's a tool. If one can weld, that's a tool. And these things are, classified as forms of art in a way, but in another way, they're just medium, technique, and process. I've spent a long time learning how to do a multitude of different processes, from bronze casting, casting arts, to welding, to painting, to fabrication, construction. But as what you do with all of these, in my particular case, is to explore ideas. Exploration of ideas has always seemed something that was paramount to me, in terms of the idea itself was the fascination, and the fascination with an idea and its visual manifestation. And the repertoire of different techniques and processes allows this manifestation to come forth. Visual arts have always been very predominant in my life, but I guess visual is predominant in everybody's life, because 80% of all information is taken in through the visual process, so it doesn't leave much for all the rest of what we call senses. But then when you start working with things like theoretical physics or quantum physics, the concepts and ideas and the offshoots of that, they're not really visual anyway. The things that science has uncovered are like beyond the visual realm. They're maybe only a product of being able to imagine, assigning possibility, and then assigning probability to the possibility. So when you do something that's never been seen, never will be seen, I always wondered, how wrong can you be? Maybe you're inventing it. I mean, I'm kind of an anthropic enthusiast anyway, so as an anthropic enthusiast, one almost, if one can imagine it, build a model of it, it is. Remember, I came across an object one time. I was looking for a spatiotemporal model of the contingency. How would the universe look if and only if we could come up with a concrete model? The model or manifold had to satisfy certain phenomena. It had to have an axis. It had to have the ability to spin. It had to be able to demonstrate how space could contract, but at the same time expand and show time in one direction. Well, I finally came up with this object. And lo and behold, a friend of mine, I asked him to do a mathematical analysis, a vector analysis of the piece. And so a couple days later I see him and he comes back and he goes, well, he says, I think it's going to be a mind scratcher. I went, what do you mean a mind scratcher? And he goes, well, all vectors equal 0, which means that it's a paradox. And that you can't prove it is, but nobody else can prove it isn't. So there it is by virtue of the object itself. So what is it? Is it or is it not? Or it being it is and being it's not, does that make the whole? If we're a Taoist, we'd say, could look at this symbol, it's got two spiraling black and white things merging. And we can say, well, that's a whole because both are contained, but there's two equal parts, so there's a symmetry to this whole. So, but how do you build that as an object? I mean, now, ooh, great idea. What material would suffice to build the universe? Well, I guess the universe has already decided on what its building blocks are, but its building blocks are beyond the reach of what we can even hardly understand, let alone harness and manipulate. And we're stuck with postmodern materials. The modern period gave us everything we still use today, and it's still giving them to us. So, to build something of what we've got from what there is to represent something that isn't and is nowhere becomes again a problem. One builds things out of what one can and uses what one can in terms of technique and process. But it's all geared again back to the idea, the formation of the idea, and how do we manifest an idea? Because when you look at an idea, where is it? It's pure information. It's there, it's out there. It enters into consciousness, becomes a neural networking through motor skills and manipulation of materials and techniques and processes. It becomes an object. But the thing that it started from was a no thing, a nothing, an idea, to now a physical thing. So even if that physical thing is wrong, how wrong can it be? Because it came from nothing to begin with. So if there's something other than nothing that can start a process, then that would be the thing itself. But since it's given and coming from no thing, then it becomes pure information. Pure information manifested into an object. Here's the object. Is this it?
Now, give me a specific object.
Nobody knows and you can't find out.
Specific example on starting with one of your pieces. What have you worked?
Well, terms of work are varied, right? I mean, the scientific end of this, and I think this is what that you're trying to look at, is what is a relationship between art and science, and especially art and technology, and the technological things that are directly related to art. If we look at process and technique, I mean, scientific information has changed the way we see it. I mean, who knew when the spectrum was first being discovered that we would be able to measure it, to know how fast each one of these things move? Who knew that the color wheel would develop into a three-dimensional color wheel eventually because of science and the way that we could review and look at information? The processes in bronze casting to cast bronzes contemporarily is scientific offshoot technique and process. The Nicol colloidal silica ceramic shell process is the process that I use to cast bronze. That's a technique and a process, but it was directly an offshoot of NASA technology, where the information that was used to put together functional pieces of tile for a re-entry vehicle were then later applied to fine art casting. First time bronze casting had probably changed in 5,000 years. Prior to that, it was done pretty much the same way. And even that was technological for its day and age. And given that the possibility that bronze may be the first technology in and of itself, because when we look at the word technology and we look at what bronze did by the alloying of different metals, bringing two different things together to create something different, then bronze casting itself and the manufacture of bronze object may have been the first technological product. Painting. If you paint, you can see the relationship of science, the development of paints and pigmentations, especially to the advent of contemporary materials in painting. Acrylic. I mean, it's a plastic. I mean, it's a product of man's technological digging oil out of the ground and transforming it into a multiplicity of different materials. I mean, brushes are plastics, paints are plastics. Without science and technology, that would not be possible. And whoever thought that that science and art would bind itself not only in technique and process, but also in theoretical application, where you have Seurat anticipating dot matrix systems. There's no technology, but the idea and the concept was there, and the relationship between the idea and the concept. Later, as science would uncover more and more and more, and functionalism would arise out of theoretical information, and functionalism then becomes technological, and once the technology starts, then the perfection of the technology continues until it manifests itself into a higher and higher state of organization, which almost in itself allows everything to get better. The computer today, I mean, one wouldn't even think about doing commercial art without realizing that you're dead if you don't do a lot of computers and you don't get it. You got to get it, and it's the computer, and that's it. There's no getting around it. It becomes another tool, just like bronze casting becomes a tool to a computer creator that's creating using a computer. It's his tool. The creativity still has to come from the consciousness. Well, that consciousness interflow between man and machine, or a cybernetic one, is again a scientific concept. Technology is an enhancer to the creative process. If we didn't have technology, and this is on a different end of the chute, why is the Sistine Chapel still standing? Why didn't it fall down? I mean, what did Michelangelo and Bronzino and some of the great architects of the Renaissance period have to know to keep those buildings going? I mean, what did they learn about the great cathedrals of Europe as time progressed on from the medieval through the Gothic period? Well, they learned about arches, they learned about stresses, they learned about science, and they learned and applied a certain building technology to be able to build taller and taller and taller churches throughout Europe. Chartres in England is a great example of that. I mean, that was a scientific, technological thing. And the Renaissance was what? The Renaissance man was the one that could do art and science. That was the concept of the Renaissance man, the neoclassical revision, but at the same time looking at the logical and functional, practical level of an Aristotelian approach. Science became inquiry. Inquiry started to snuff out dogma. And science added to men. But artists, I mean, were doing, drawings of the human body. I mean, because they were cutting them open like doing an autopsy today would be. But nobody had ever done that before. So, but there was a curiosity, and maybe science manifests itself in that curiosity for the learning process itself. Through the Renaissance we grew. The Renaissance man, the art and the science. But as science became more powerful, I think it started to separate itself from art. Because it started to use the ultimate tool, doubt. It developed the camera. How important is the camera in photography? Well, I mean, not in photography, but in art. I mean, it's a major fine art category. It's functional. I mean, I'm looking at a camera right now. I'm looking at the lenses of technology. That same camera, though, could be filming a sunset right now, you know, with two people in the background, you know, running towards each other to kiss, you know, in a romantic setting. So the tool can be used here like it is right now, being focused on a discussion of art and science, or it can be used as a tool to actually create a romantic scene or a creative aspect. It can be used functionally to teach. It can be used, but the creative element and the science mixing together are what create the tool itself. The camera is probably one of the best examples of why art grew. I mean, artists to that period in time when the camera came along had worked all their lives to paint like a camera could photograph with the flash of some luminescent powder and 10 minutes in a dark room. If the machine at that point then could produce the perfect image of reality, what was art? What was the point of making it if that was what it was to that point? But now a tool can do that. Does art have to become something else? I think from that point forward it became something else. And from that point forward, technology and art combined at a rapid rate. It's like today, you know, as a sculptor, you're working with a lot of machines right now that cut the intensity of the labor factor by 1,000%. I mean, as I cast bronze and I look back at the Renaissance or pre-Renaissance period, I go, man, and they didn't even have a 30,000 RPM die grinder. How did they do this? I think it's almost impossible, laborious, labor-intensive stuff, and I've got state-of-the-art die grinders, 30,000 RPMs with the finest abrasives that, you know, that can cut through anything. But somehow they did it without that. They had a different technology. They had a technology going, but technology improves. It makes things faster. It makes things quicker. In the case of bronze casting, it has made a better product. It's made a better object itself, and it's cut down the labor intensity factor. The process that we use, I mean, is very scientific. In fact, it's when we cast, I mean, physics is probably 90% of the talking that we do about what we're doing while we're going through the casting process itself. It's all contingent. It's hydrostatic pressures, it's weights, it's gravity, pour, feeds. So we can't get away from a physical world to be able to do the process that we do. Physical, physics, what explains physics is science. But science has nothing to do with the aesthetic or the object itself or what is the nature and purpose of the object. It's the tool. So, and finally, you know, my understanding is that science is just a tool. That science itself, like technology, you can't say, and I think a good example is that you can't say the computer is greater than the operator itself. That the operator is the creator. No matter how sophisticated the tool, it's still dependent on operator and user. But the operator is the one that puts into it what they want into it. Maybe the difference between technology, machine, and man is that a machine will always make the same decision given the same stimulus or the same response from the same factor, where man can make a different decision based upon the same thing at different times. So that doesn't paint man as wishy-washy, but it says that man is much more versatile. Maybe man is more than just 0 or 1. That maybe man in the creative process is where the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Art and technology, is spun from art about science. And art and science itself is what technology arrives from. So it would be like trying to talk about technology without science is impossible. And a lot of people, I think, would like to think that they're separate in some way. But the problem with dependency, like on technology and tool, is we become limbless, handless, armless. Like, you're running this sophisticated camera right now. If something goes wrong with it, can you fix it? I don't think so. You know what I mean? It's like if my TV breaks, what do? So we live in a world that we're bifurcated because of science and technology, where if I sit down and I sculpt something out of a raw piece of clay, I know what that is. I've got control of the entire process. But in a technological-based world, we don't have control of that. You could ask people, well, how many of you can fix your own car? Not many. You can't fix the computer chips. Maybe that's why the resurgence of backyard mechanics in this country is like, man, I can fix this when it's just a simple machine where it's not dependent on thousands of decision-making operations to turn on my ignition. I can do it with a key. So we become alienated in a way, I think, in a technological world. An art and technology show recently, I saw people, especially computer operators that were doing animation on computers, saying that this is the only creativity that, that this is it, this is the future, this is everything. But that's not so. These people knew nothing about the annals of modern art theory. They only knew what they thought, which was that the computer will do it all and take over everything. But the computer yet still has not been able to come up with an idea. It can only draw from what's in it, where man and creativity and art draws from the no-thing world, the idea world, brings it into manifestation. The idea of even the computer was a no-thing at one time, so it is really the product of creativity, as technology is the creativity of science. And how do we get this functional or practical? So,
I like that. That was beautiful.
that work?
I like that. Let's go. I want to get, since I've got so much footage of, I want to actually get a process of the bronze wing.
Did that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, I just get going.
Okay.
I call it intellectual babble.
Doesn't matter, whatever order you want to go in.
Okay, well, let me see if I can organize something here. The question would be something like bronze and technology. Well, again, to look back at bronze itself, the way that different alloys had to come together to create it. Bronze is basically a sculpted object. A die or mold is made, and then metal is melted down and poured into it, and the finished product comes out of the mold. Well, mold making was originally from carving out different objects in rock. very hard rock, and then pouring metal into it, into two halves, and then the two halves were separated, and you would have something like a dagger or a sword or an axe head. The process as we use it today has changed because of science. Science and technology have given the modern bronze caster an edge. I mean, you still go through the same processes when you're sculpting. You're working with clay, but instead of going out and digging your own clay out of the riverbed, I mean, it's manufactured by a formula, and you can buy a multiplicity of different formulas to get the different textures and or strengths of clay. The process of sculpting it, though, is the same. If you're a classical realist, you use a mathematical canonization of the human figure to sculpt from. If you're neoclassicist, you use the anatomical, which gives us the closest to what we look like realistically. But then there's abstraction and a multiplicity of visual deviations that can create impressions or expressions of the human form, say if we were sculpting that. But the process of putting it into metal has changed only by virtue of science and technology. For instance, at one time to make a rubber mold, after you had finished your sculpture, to go make a rubber mold meant that you went out and you found a rubber tree if you lived in Southeast Asia or South America. You drained and you dripped latex, rubber until you got enough rubber to be able to make a mold. Painting it on a multiplicity of different things. The advent and the development of silicons and silicon rubber changed it. It's a exothermic process that has catalyzed. You mix it, you pour it, and you have a rubber mold that's good for 50 times longer than the archaic method of mold making. The process of casting a wax would be the same. You would take a rubber mold, you'd cast a wax copy. The waxes that we use are different. They're casting waxes, which means that they have a certain degree of plastic in them anymore. They're finer, they're harder, you get a better surface on them. And so the waxes themselves, I mean, when you can buy a formula for a wax as opposed to just going out and putting waxes together to try to create enough meltable material to be able to make a copy of your work to get ready for bronze casting. Today it's a formula, and you buy the kind of wax you need for the environment, for the temperature, for the hardness, for the surface that you want. The waxes are all scientifically engineered, literally. The bronze itself, when we buy bronze today, we don't go, the old Phoenician trade routes to find ingots of tin. I mean, we don't have to travel halfway around the world. We just call up major metal distributors, give them our formula, they mix it for us. Buy a formula for a wax as opposed to just going out and putting waxes together to try to create enough meltable material to be able to make a copy of your work.